Welcome to this Aurelion Soul Ultimate Guide for Season 13. This guide will show you how to deal optimal damage with his unique abilities, dominate in teamfights using effective strategies, tips and trips to gain an edge over your opponents, and much more. It includes all the best builds from the top pro and solo queue players. Whatever your goal is this season, whether it's gold, plat, diamond or higher, this guide will help you reach it. If you're unsure whether Aurelion Soul is the champ for you, check out the strengths and weakness section first. All timestamps and details are in the description below. If this guide helps you at any time or you simply enjoyed it, consider subscribing. I'm Zoose and let's get straight into the video. Let's quickly go over his abilities, then after each one, I'll show you tips and tricks to gain an advantage. Let's cover his passive, Cosmic Creator, first. Anytime you damage enemies with your abilities, you'll gain Stardust. This Stardust will be used to improve each of your ability. The more the Stardust, the more your abilities improve. You can't lose Stardust, so it builds up the entire game, making Aurelion Soul a late game scaling champion. We'll cover how each ability is improved as we go over that ability. His Q, Breath of Light, channels a beam, damaging and revealing all enemies hit. It does less damage after the first enemy hit. For each second enemies take damage, they will take an extra burst of damage and you'll gain 1 Stardust if it's a champion. You can channel it for about 3 seconds. When you have 5 points in this ability, it has no channel time as long as you have enough mana. Gaining Stardust improves this ability by increasing the burst damage. This ability deals percentage HP damage, helping you shred through those tankier champions. Breath of Light increases in range as you level up. Here's the range at level 1, and then at level 18. Aim it when enemies are bunched up for the AoE and use it to clear waves. Because it reveals enemies hit, it's great to check brushes or any fog of war areas, like over a wall, without having to face check or use wards. Even though it is a skill shot, careful using it around minions as the burst damage will draw minion aggro. You can use all summoner spells, except Flash and Teleport, without interrupting the channel. We'll be able to increase the damage as well as reset the cooldown of Q with the next ability. His W, Astral Flight, allows Aurelion to dash to a target location. During this long range dash, he is able to use Breath of Light, which will now have no cooldown, no maximum channel duration, and it will increase the damage. However, his speed will be reduced. You can recast this ability to stop. If you score a takedown within 3 seconds, which is a killer assist, it will almost fully reset the cooldown of Astral Flight. Gaining Stardust improves this ability by increasing the range you can travel. Here's the distance at 1 Stardust, and here's the distance at 400 Stardust, an amount you might have mid to late game. This becomes your main tool to chase, escape, and roam the map. Use it over walls and other terrain to surprise enemies and enter fights. Don't be afraid to Astral Flight into risky areas if there's a good chance you'll get a kill. The cooldown reset will then let you get out safely. For clarity, if you get a kill or assist while flying, it will count as a reset. Use it in base to get to lane faster. It will be off cooldown once you get back to lane. You can use any abilities while dashing without cancelling the flight path, allowing for some interesting drive-by combos. Auto-attacking will cancel your flight. I'll show you a bunch of techniques and combos. Look for chances to steal objectives like Dragon and Baron. Just like Q, you can use all summoner spells except Flash and Teleport without interrupting the flight path. His E, Singularity, creates a black hole that lasts for 5 seconds, damaging enemies over time within the area. Enemies within the outer circle will be dragged towards the center. You'll gain Stardust for every second champions are inside it, and even more when they die. Enemies within the center, except for epic monsters, will be executed below 5% HP. Gaining Stardust improves this ability by increasing the outer and inner radius, as well as increasing the execute damage percentage. Here's the size of Singularity at 1 Stardust, and here it is at 400 Stardust. This is one of the best abilities to gain Stardust, so use it to wave clear, poke champions, take jungle camp monsters, and even dragons and barons, making sure to execute towards the end of the channel. It provides vision of the area the whole time, so use it to check brushes or fog of war. You want to aim this right in the middle of most champions, so enemies have to walk the longest possible distance to get out, taking more damage. It's a unique mechanic, since it doesn't technically slow enemies, it just drags them towards the center. It can even speed them up if they walk towards the center. And finally, his ultimate, Falling Star, has two parts. The first part calls down a meteor that deals damage and stuns enemies. You'll gain Stardust for every champion hit. Gaining Stardust improves this ability by increasing the radius. Here's the radius at 1 Stardust and 400 Stardust. This ability is great to engage and disengage. Use the long range to snipe low HP enemies. The second part, you'll be able to empower your ultimate into Sky's Descend after collecting 75 Stardust. It will now deal more damage, create a large shockwave area, and you'll knock up enemies instead of stunning them. The shockwave will expand for 3 seconds, damaging, revealing, and slowing all enemies hit. Once you've used this empowered ultimate, you'll have to collect another 75 Stardust to activate it again. This is a game-changing AoE ultimate, capable of knocking up and damaging an entire enemy team. Aim it when enemies are bunched up in teamfights. Your empowered ultimate will appear on the side of your HP bar. Even the enemy team can see this. Use the stun or knock up CC to force enemies to stay within your E, as they'll get dragged towards the center. It can be an easy skill shot to dodge, so use your E drag mechanic, item slows, your ally CC, or wait until enemies have committed before using it. Just like the first part of his ultimate, it's great to snipe low HP enemies, but this time you can finish them off with a shockwave, which covers about half the map and even more with plenty of Stardust. Anytime you or your team need to make an important pick, use the vision and slow the shockwave provides. Remember to farm waves or camps with multiple monsters to quickly get 75 Stardust and have it activated for the next fight. Ability order. You want to max Q first. This will be your main source of consistent damage, and once it's fully maxed, it will have an unlimited channel. Max E next for another source of AoE damage and wave clear. It will help you set up your other abilities with the CC. You'll want to max W last, as it's used purely for utility. Even though you max Q first, you want to take E at level 1 in most cases. And of course level your ultimate when it's available, which is at levels 6, 11 and 16. First we'll cover all optimal runes, then all item choices to consider, followed up by summoner spells. The two most optimal and popular runes are First Strike and Arcane Comet, followed by two less popular but still viable, Dark Harvest and Unsealed Spellbook. First Strike seems to be the most popular rune as it provides a bunch of damage and gold for every trade, however you must hit the enemy first. It scales very well into the late game, which is where Aurelion's soul shines. If you're up against long range opponents, this rune will become less optimal. As for minor runes, take Magical Footwear first. Minion Dematerializer is the next choice, helping you clear waves slightly faster. Use it on each minion type, so one for melee, caster, and the cannon minion. Finally, Cosmic Insight for the reliable summoner spell and item haste. Futures Market, Biscuit Delivery, and Perfect Timing are all viable options to consider. As for second pages, take Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm for sorcery. You can take Mana Flow Band, but you'll already have plenty of mana from Rod and tier items if you're going to choose those. Transcendence is usually a default option for most AP mages, however, Aurelion's Soul has plenty of resets on Q and W, so it's not as optimal. If you'd like a defensive option to withstand burst, take Bone Plating and Overgrowth. Arcane Comet is the next most popular rune, applying extra damage anytime you land your abilities. Q and E reduce the cooldown of this comet for every tick of damage. You can tap Q quickly to proc the comet damage. You'll be able to proc multiple comets in a teamfight. Your E drag mechanic and old CC make it hard for enemies to dodge the comet damage. For minor runes, you want to take Mana Flow Band, Absolute Focus, and Gathering Storm. For second page options, any of the previously mentioned inspiration tree is fine. A popular combo is Magical Footwear and Minion Dematerializer. or pick the defensive option, Bone Plating and Overgrowth. Dark Harvest, a great scaling rune picking up stacks every time you damage enemies below 50% HP. Not very consistent however, since you'll rarely have the chance early game as you'll be focusing on farming. Take this if you're extremely confident and enemies are mostly squishy. You want Taste of Blood as your first minor rune, Eyeball Collection for the second, and then Ultimate Hunter. For second pages, any of the previously mentioned runes are fine. Some popular combinations are Magical Footwear and Minion Dematerializer for Inspiration, Gathering Storm and Absolute Focus from Sorcery, and Bone Plating and Overgrowth from Resolve. Unsealed Spellbook, an extremely flexible rune with the possibility to change summoner spells through the game. You want to start with Flash and Teleport, then pick a different summoner spell in-game depending on your situation. Need some extra damage and healing reduction to kill an enemy? Take Ignite. Want some extra protection against a threat in the next fight? Take Exhaust. I'd recommend this rune after you're more experienced with Aurelion and understand his limits and potential. You can pick up the same minor runes and second pages as First Strike. Items. Starting options. Doran's Ring plus 2 HP pots. AP, HP and mana sustain to get you through early laning phase. Tier plus 2 HP pots. A little riskier, but you'll start stacking your tier much earlier towards your Seraph's Embrace. Only take this start against low threats. Components. Boots. Pick up these early for skill shot lanes to help with dodging. Not an option if you've picked Magical Footwear. Dark Seal. A cheap early item that can snowball from kills and assists. Catalyst of Aeons. Your first goal before you base at 1100 gold. Provides HP and mana plus sustain. Lost Chapter. If you're going Liandry's, a good aim is to have 1300 gold on your first back or so. All mana problems will be solved with this item. Mythic options. Rod of Ages. By far the most popular mythic, providing HP, mana and AP stats along with a bonus movement speed passive. This will give you an incredible amount of sustain and helps you become a little tanky. It will take 10 minutes to fully scale. Liandry's Anguish. The next viable mythic item providing plenty of percentage HP damage. This item provides no HP, so you'll be a lot squishier than with the previous Rod mythic. However, you'll have an instant power spike, shredding anything that lets you channel Q. Ludens Tempest. Probably the last viable mythic, providing a burst of splash damage from the Echo passive. Every second of Q and E will reduce the cooldown of this passive, allowing you to get multiple procs in a teamfight. Again, you'll be squishy compared to the Rod of Ages item, but the power spike will be instant. I would rarely recommend this item, as Rod of Ages can still one-shot most squishies with a proper combo, while Liandry's is your tank shredding option. Boots. Your second tier boots in 90% of games is Sorcerer's Shoes. The magic penetration synergizes extremely well with your damage over time abilities. Mercury Treads are a safer option, especially against heavy AP and CC threats. If you need defensive options, you can just purchase legendary items instead if you'd like the Sorceress for damage. Plated Steel Caps are the last viable boots, perhaps against an all AD team. Again, you can buy defensive legendary items if you want protection against AD champions. Legendary options. Rylai's Crystal Scepter. This has incredible synergy with all your damaging abilities. The constant slows allow you to channel Q longer, force enemies to stay within your E radius longer, and even slow enemies from your ultimate so you or your team can then follow up. Archangel's Staff, an item that provides stats plus an important shield at 360 tier stacks when it's transformed into Seraph's Embrace. You'll find yourself positioning quite close, so take this if you need to absorb some damage against certain threats. You'll also have close to no mana problems with this item. Shadow Flame, a magic penetration power spike helping you shred and burst most enemies. If enemies don't have shields, pick Horizon Focus instead. Horizon Focus will activate the extra damage anytime you use E or R, you purchase Rylai's, or you hit enemies from long range. Rabadon's Deathcap, the ultimate AP power spike, since it scales with AP, best purchased as your 4th or later item. Magi's Soul Stealer, a great item to snowball leads, especially if you have 5 or more stacks on your Dark Seal already and you see yourself picking up some easy kills. Zonya's Hourglass, an armor defensive option with the important Stasis active, which can be effective against AP threats too. Banshee's Veil, if you're at risk of getting caught out by some threatening CC from long range, then pick this up. great against multiple AP threats for the MR. Void Staff, usually purchased towards late game to counter all MR enemies are building. Don't hesitate to get it early if you have to, perhaps as your 4th item. Demonic Embrace, against 3 or more tanks, you might just need some extra percentage HP damage to shred through all that extra HP. Morellonomicon, you'll need this to counter healing comps. You can pick up Oblivion Orb first and finish this later on. If your support has Chemtech Putrefier, you won't need this. Cosmic Drive, probably the final viable legendary item worth considering. Stats plus a movement speed passive. Lichbane, only purchase this as a last resort to backdoor. You can easily tap Q and receive a Glitchbane proc every 1.5 seconds, helping you take towers, inhibs, and the Nexus extremely fast. Shards, you want Adaptive as your first and second choices, then pick AD or MR depending on your lane matchup. Summoner Spells, Flash is the best first choice summoner spell, helping you escape, chase, and outplay. Teleport is a safer and more flexible option. Whether you need to early back after a bad trade, buy an early scaling item like Rod of Ages, or join a team fight later on while you're side laning, this seems to be the second best summoner spell. Ignite can be useful, especially to counter healing based champions. However, you'll be focused on farming most of the early game. Ghost is both a defensive and offensive option, however, you already have plenty of mobility with your W. Exhaust is a defensive option to consider against heavy burst assassin threats. Remember, you can always purchase something like Zhonya's. The slow is great to keep enemies still while channeling your Q and E. Barrier and Cleanse as the final defensive options. I would recommend Flash and Teleport while you're still learning Aurelion Soul. Aurelion Soul's playstyle involves careful timing and positioning to deal optimal damage. Let's go over some combos and interactions. Basic ability combos. Main trade poke. E then Q. A basic combo that will be used in lane, skirmishes, and teamfights, whether it's on a single target or multiple enemies. Your E will drag them towards the center while Q deals damage. Aim to use E right on the center so enemies have to walk the furthest distance to get out. Try timing this combo after the enemy has committed with a dash or blink, or they've used their CC so they can't cancel your Q. The drive-by. W, E, Q. Engage with W, then E while you're within range, then instantly start cancelling Q. You want to continue flying for the increased Q damage. Only commit to this if it's safe or you're confident you'll get the kill, since W has a long cooldown, especially early game. Chase resets. WQ. After almost every trade or fight, you want to continue chasing down enemies with W and then Q because of their low cooldowns. You can even proc this multiple times in a fight, giving you a very good chance to clean up fights. All-in pre-6 combo. E, Q, then W and Q. You want to use the main trade and poke combo, and if they're low enough, you'll now want to commit by using W and Q again. Q will be instantly off cooldown once you start flying. Ultimate combos. Quick Burst Ult. E, Ultimate Q. All your damaging abilities for a quick burst of damage. A full ultimate combo. E, Ultimate, Q, then W and Q. This combo is best when enemies are within E range. You'll use E to drag enemies, then follow up with R. It will make it slightly harder for enemies to get out of your R range, especially if you have Rylai's and they're immobile. Then proceed to channel Q. Once they're out of range, follow up with W and Q. This can be used on a single target or multiple enemies. Drive-by ultimate. W, E, ultimate, Q. We'll be using W to engage and get close to enemies. Follow up with E, R, then channel Q on the stunned or knocked up target while you're flying. And you want to use all this while flying. Use walls to surprise enemies as well as a safer way to avoid melee champs from even being able to attack you. Flash combos. Flash then ultimate. Finish off low HP enemies further away. Flash cancels. Using flash while channeling Q or W's flight will cancel them. Not something you really want to do, but it's important to know. Item combos. Zhonya's Hourglass. E, Ultimate, Zhonya. You'll be dealing damage from E and R while you're in the safety of Zhonya's stasis. Great for clutch moments where you risk dying and want to buy some time. Zhonya's active will interrupt your flight path. Unique combos. Drive-by Smite Steal. W in, then Smite. If you've taken Unsealed Spellbook and there's a Baron or Dragon coming up, you can try to Smite Steal it while flying over it. Smite will not cancel your flight. Use E, Ultimate and Q for even higher potential to steal the monster. Careful as you'll need to get in Smite range and enemies will most likely try to collapse on you. Have an item like Zhonya's ready and hopefully even your team nearby. Interactions. Recast W without breaking Q channel. Sometimes you'll start flying away from targets. Keep holding Q and then recast W to stop flying. It won't interrupt your Q. While in flight, if enemies are just outside of your Q range, stop casting Q and let yourself be sped up. Then once within range, use Q again. When you need to change your Q direction while in flight, especially if you need to do a 180, it's better to just turn off Q, switch directions and press Q again. It's slightly quicker than moving all the way around, allowing you to deal more damage. Using E and Ultimate while channeling Q will interrupt it and put your Q on cooldown if you use it before you put 5 points in Q. Once Q is fully maxed, so usually when you're level 9, it will no longer get cancelled after using E and Ultimate. Auto attack mention. During the early phases of the game, auto attacks are important to wave clear and trade with enemies. However, once you've got more mana and have reached level 9, you will rarely ever want to auto attack, otherwise you'll lose plenty of damage from Q. Here's a few mechanics with each of his abilities that aren't exactly game changing, but might just give you an edge over your opponents. His Q. The damage ticks every 0.2 seconds, so 5 times every second. It takes 5 procs to proc the extra burst damage. You can check connecting dots animation on the target to see how many stacks. Sometimes against some threats, you just want to get one burst stack and then back off. Use it quickly to apply runes like Arcane Comet, First Strike or Dark Harvest, as well as spell damage from items like Liandry's Anguish, Rylai's Crystal Scepter and Demonic Embrace. You'll get all these activated without putting Q on cooldown and only using a little bit of mana. If you prefer, change your Q to normal cast. This means you'll only have to click it once to fully cast it, compared to quick cast where you have to hold Q the entire time. This does not count as a projectile, so you can use it through Yasuo's Wind Wall as well as Samira's W Blade Whirl. Spell shields like Siva's E and Malzahar's passive, as well as items like Banshees and Edge of Night, will only block the first tick of Q. This becomes a great way to remove spell shields before using other abilities. His W. While passing through walls, some enemies, especially melee champs, will have a hard time targeting you. Use walls during important fights to negate damage. You can clip through walls, which can save some time and get you to a location quicker. Simply recast W. It will usually drag you to the closest side of the wall to the ground. Remember to look for the small star animation to know how far you will travel. Only you can see this, by the way, enemies and teammates cannot. Aim it through thick walls to get extra distance. When using it to get out of base quicker or roaming, a common issue I see is players completely stop after their flight path is finished. Make sure to click far ahead while flying to continue pathing once the flight is over. If you click too close to the flight path or anywhere behind the direction path, it will cancel your flight early. This is important to note, as cancelling your flight can mess up your combos and even escape paths. W constantly changes your camera movement. Practice this as much as possible, since it feels quite clunky at the beginning. Sometimes you'll start moving off screen while channeling Q. It's best to use your camera center button, otherwise you risk missing some damage since you'll be using your mouse to move the screen. And therefore your Q will start directing somewhere else. If you're around bot or top lane, use the alcove walls for escapes or chases. Very few enemies can catch you. While traveling through walls, enemies will have vision of you if they are within range. Movement speed buffs increase your dash speed, so basically you'll fly faster. Use these either from your teammates, out of base speed, or the river speed buff to engage or escape quicker. His E. Aurelion is one of few champs, another one being Syndra, that can drag or move minions to a specific spot. Use this drag mechanic to move minions out of tower range and create a freeze next to your tower when you can. This makes it ideal for junglers to gank, allows you to go for long trades where you can chase your laner with W, as well as provide safety from enemy junglers. Similar to Q, E will remove spell shields with the first tick. It ticks every 0.25 seconds, so 4 times a second. Even though it is a skill shot, if you kill a champion with the execute, it will draw minion aggro, so you might need to take this into account. Side lane clear. Once you've got 2 to 3 items, your E can completely clear a stack of minions without needing to use Q. This can be a quick way to wave clear and join your team, without having to stay on the side lane. Completely zone out players during mid to late game by placing it in tight and important areas. Not only does it provide vision, enemies, especially squishy champs, simply cannot walk through without losing a chunk of their HP. When it's safe, remember to use it on heralds, barons and dragons when they are close to dying, otherwise you will not pick up the massive chunk of stardust. Here's ultimate. After using E, enemies will try to run out of the radius, therefore aim your ultimate towards the side they're trying to escape from. You can surprise enemies with the empowered ultimate if there's minions or monsters nearby. For example, if you're a few stardust from 75, say around 70 to 74, keep it like that until a fight is about to break out. Then finish off a minion or a few, activate your empowered ultimate, and then use it in the fight. This will surprise most enemies as they were probably expecting a normal ultimate without the shockwave. Don't hold 70 to 74 stardust for too long though, as you still want to be scaling by farming up. And a final passive tip. A good aim is to have around 100 stardust by level 10, and around 250 to 300 by level 20, since you'll have more mana and damage to clear waves faster. This can depend on your game however, but it's a good goal to have. Early game. I would rarely recommend invading, however if you have strong invade champs on your team, you'll want to take Q right before the fight starts. It will deal plenty of damage if you're able to get a full channel and has a low cooldown. Laning phase is your time to farm safely and focus on scaling for later, as you'll have very low kill pressure. Use E to finish off minions to ensure you collect stardust. Aim to be efficient with mana, trying to use E on minions and the enemy champion. Also try to time them with runes like Arcane Comet, Mana Flow Band, or First Strike whenever they're up. If you've taken a bad trade, just recall, buy a tier, refillable, and teleport back to lane. You'll want to keep the wave near your tower, especially before level 3. After that you can use W to get away from any ganks, but it would still be ideal to freeze wave close to your tower for potential to chase enemies with QWQ. Only commit to using W in lane if it's safe, as it's your only escape tool. Try not to spam Q on the waves until you have at least one mana item like Catalyst or Lost Chapter. You want to avoid trading with most champs unless they commit or use their CC first, which you can then follow up with an EQ combo. At level 6 you'll have some kill pressure with a full ultimate combo. You'll now have great setup anytime your jungler decides to gank. Just W to gap close and follow up with an ER. It will at least force a flash. Again, you should still be focused on farming and scaling, so don't force any plays if they're not in your favor. Roaming is an option, using W to engage on enemies. Even look for dives against certain vulnerable enemies. Try to come from behind and through walls, pathing through areas that are the least warded. Look to join skirmishes with your jungler. You'll usually beat your laner to fights using W, just try to push in waves first. While in skirmishes, it's important not to be the main focus. Again, wait for enemies to commit using their flash or dashes, or their CC, then you can start dealing damage. Fights and skirmishes around the river are great since there's plenty of walls to fly over. Enemies will be bunched up, making it easier to land an ultimate on multiple targets, as well as deal AoE damage with E and Q. You'll have great potential to reset and clean up fights. Mid-game. The game really starts to take off for Aurelion's soul during mid-game. You'll have 2 to 3 items, hopefully your rod will be fully stacked, and perhaps even your Seraph's Embrace. You can now one-shot most squishies and heavily chunk tanks. Look to make picks with or without your team. Teamfights are in your favor, especially if you have your empowered ultimate ready. Even if you don't hit enemies with the main target knockup area, the shockwave damage, vision, and slow will help you and your team catch those enemies hit. Force fights around Baron and Dragon pits when you can. Since you are scaling, farming is still a crucial part of your gameplay. Side laning will be necessary to stay up in levels and gold. You've got W to escape most ganks, and even use R for peel if you have that too. Look to join any fights nearby too, and even teleport across the map when you can. When you have the chance, take jungle camps, especially the enemy's camps. You take them really quick at this stage. Prioritize camps that have multiple monsters. You can even use your E to quickly push waves and leave it to execute them. You take dragons and barons pretty fast with your consistent damage from Q and E. Remember to use E towards the end of epic monsters' HP in order to pick up a chunk of their stardust. You can even solo a dragon pretty easily, even over the wall. Late game. Reaching late game is your ultimate goal and it will be your time to shine. With multiple scaling items, your collected stardust, and empowered ultimate, you'll dominate most late game teamfights. Most of mid game applies, but this time you'll have a lot more damage and range. You will shred anything within your path. As with mid game, look to make picks with or without your team, continue picking up farm, even if you're full build, as your stardust scales infinitely, sneak a solo dragon if you can, and force fights around objective areas. Teamfighting can happen at any stage of the game when most of your team is grouped up. There's many factors that you should take into account, like your items, enemies' positioning, summoner spell cooldowns, threats to look out for, etc. Despite all that, you should have a goal in mind before the fight starts. Let's go over your priorities. AoE damage and CC. Your ultimate is game changing, especially when it's empowered. Landing a single ultimate can easily win you the fight and consequently the entire game. Try to time your ultimate with ally CC. If you have an AoE ultimate on your team, like an army wave, it will be close to impossible for enemies to get out of range. While enemies are CC'd, they won't be able to escape from your E and will be dragged to the center. Poke safely. Your Q will slowly increase in range as you level up, and E will increase in the size as you pick up stardust. At level 18, you can play much further back, making it harder for enemies to get to you. Utilize walls to keep your distance and make it difficult for certain champs to return damage. Burst squishies. If you see a vulnerable champion out of position, don't be afraid to W in and turn into an assassin with a full ultimate combo. Use W reset to reposition. Shred tanks. It won't always be easy to attack the backline, so focus on the closest target. Luckily, you've got everything it takes to shred any tank that allows you to channel your Q. Kite and positioning. Some enemy team comps will start rushing you. Use WQ backwards to kite them, and use R as a disengage tool. Zoning. Placing an E in tight areas will force many squishy immobile enemies to back off entirely or risk taking an insane amount of damage. They'll either have to wait 5 seconds for E to run out or run through it. Clean up. It's extremely important to survive during those fights because of your potential to clean up fights with your W reset. If you're the main damage dealer on your team, you have to make sure you almost never die in a team fight. So playing passive is the best approach. Escape and wave clear. Some teamfights will go south really quickly. If you see this happen, just do everything you can to escape. Focus on clearing waves and prolong the game as long as possible. The longer the game goes, the higher the chance you'll have to scale. Let's first go over the reasons you want to pick Aurelion Sol over other champions, then I'll mention weaknesses, covering some solutions. If you're simply here to play against Aurelion and want to counter him, I'll quickly mention how to do that after weaknesses. Strengths. AoE damage and CC. He dominates teamfights. Burst damage from a full combo to pop a squishy, or consistent damage from E and Q to shred a tank. Add CC from E and R and Rylai's, and enemies will have close to no chance of escaping. Game-changing ultimate. His ultimate alone can change the course of the game. A single multiple champion stun will turn a fight. Add his empowered ultimate into the equation, and you have one of the best ultimates in the game. Mobile with his resets. Because of the reset of his W, Aurelion Sol can quickly position multiple times and snowball fights once a single enemy has fallen. He's extremely mobile for a mage. Long range. With 3 long range abilities, plus the increase in range as he levels and collects stardust, he becomes safer as the game progresses. Scales infinitely. No matter how long a game takes, you will keep getting stronger. Never give up when playing Aurelion Sol and be as patient as possible during those early stages. Mastering the early game is key to succeeding on Aurelion. Weaknesses. He's weak early. Unless enemies are standing still the entire time, Aurelion's damage is lackluster early on. At heavy mana costs, Aurelion needs items to get the ball rolling. Use all the tips in gameplay to survive laning. Practice farming if you have to. Once you get past his early phase, you'll be rewarded later on. Vulnerable Q. Although it does plenty of damage, channeling your Q on its own requires you to stand still. During this time, enemies have an easy chance to land skill shots or jump on top of you. This is why timing is important. Wait for enemies to use dashes, blinks, or CC, then it's your turn to retaliate. Items like Rod of Ages and Seraphs help you tank a little more for those moments you have to stand your ground and fight till death. Needs Stardust. Farm is extremely important. You'll need to look for farm outside of laning phase 2. If you do pick up kills early without enough Stardust, you'll still struggle to scale. Also, you'll struggle to activate your empowered ultimate, missing out on way more damage and utility. Same solution as the first weakness. Practice farming constantly around the map. Take enemy jungle camps when you can. With TP up and W, you can join any fights while side laning. Relies on resets. When your team is behind, it can be tough to get that first kill in a team fight. If you aren't able to get any resets, your W is a long cooldown, making you an immobile mage. If your team is behind, you'll have to play much safer in fights, staying back and poking enemies within range. Skill shot reliant. Missing an ultimate can leave you vulnerable to a counter attack. E by itself is easy for enemies to walk out of. When it comes to landing more skill shots more effectively, use your team CC for a chance to follow up. Remember to get Rylai's as a second item to slow enemies and increase your chance to land R and Q. Quick counter tips. So if you're here to counter Aurelion, here's a summary of his weaknesses and how to take advantage of them. He's weak early. This is when you need to poke, trade and all in him. While he's using E or Q on the wave, then go aggressive on him. Aim your skill shots while he's channeling Q, since he's standing still. Don't bother asking for ganks if you or your jungler don't have any CC, as he can just W away. If he ever uses his W in lane, it's a long cooldown, around 20 seconds early game, he's got no escape. His E and R are generally easy to dodge and move out of range on their own, but used together, it will be a little harder. As long as you dodge those two abilities, he won't be able to outtrade you. His Q only deals AoE damage to enemies close to the first target hit. Therefore, use minions and other champions when available to block the damage. If you're after style points, try picking up guaranteed kills using BM. Spam Q in multiple directions. Don't be afraid to test your limits with Aurelion's Soul, especially when using his W. I honestly believe there's no real way to learn a champion like Aurelion other than truly pushing your limits and finding out how much you can risk. Over time, you'll have a feeling for knowing when and when not to engage, as well as trusting the damage from your Q, especially in those moments where you need to stand your ground and fight to the death. Let me know if I've missed anything in the comments below, or if there's any feedback to help improve these guides. If this guide helped you at any time, consider subscribing. Let me know what champion guide you want to see next. I'm Zoose, good luck in your rank games, and I'll see you in the next video.